Hi, everyone. Thank you to all who are here on time, but I do think that we will have more people joining shortly. So a brief introduction for all of you here. Today's webinar's topic is about the OKR processes. So it's not per se about writing OKRs, but about what makes them work, because truth be told, it's not just in the way that you write your goals, but how persistent you are in achieving them. For all of you joining our webinars for the first time, my name is Anna. And your speaker for today is Richard, who is the head of customer success and sales here at Weekdone. And do take the time today to think about your questions around the topic that we're discussing. And if you have any questions beyond this topic, that's okay too. Feel free to start already taking notes regarding what you would like to ask from Richard, since he has a lot of experience that he can share with you. And I do recommend taking this chance to discuss whatever is on your mind regarding this topic. The video of this presentation today will be shared with you, so don't worry about that. Try to focus on learning as much as you can today and not about taking notes. Try to listen to Richard and think about the questions that you have to him. In the Zoom, if you're joining for the first time, if you hover over your window that you have open right now, you will see the menu panel. And on that menu panel, you will see the chat, and you will also see the Q&A. So if you have a question, it's better to use the Q&A section, not the chat. The chat we will use for other purposes. We will share probably some useful links or some additional reading that would be useful to follow up on the topic that we're discussing, right? So in a few moments, Richard is going to start the poll. You will see a window over your Zoom, and please do take some minutes to answer that poll, because that will help us in the Q&A section that we will have at the end of the session. It's just better for us to know our audience so that we can answer your questions a little bit better. If you think that there are some other topics that you would like us to cover in the future, maybe there is some help that you already know that you will need, feel free to share with us what kind of topics you would like us to cover, because we do host these webinars regularly. All of them are live, because we do believe that live interaction does help to answer more questions and brings more value. This is actually quite a unique approach, because most of the webinars out there these days are recorded. So do take this chance to ask your questions, because you can interact with your speaker live. And at the end of the session, we will put together a list of the most frequently asked questions or the best questions, and we will have a discussion live. Just so you know, today we have our team here, Tanel and I actually will be answering your questions as we go through the webinar. So if you post something in the Q&A, we will answer you right away, and maybe we'll also have a discussion about your question at the end. So I think everyone who wanted to be here is already here. So let's kick off this session, and Richard, have a great webinar. Richard, your microphone.
I'll unmute myself. You're correct, Anna. That works.
Okay.
So thanks, Anna. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm Richard from Weekdone. And let me just quickly cover what we'll talk about today. So we're really going to talk about the core OKR processes within the quarter. So it's all about setting and aligning OKRs. I'm going to talk about the process of setting and aligning, not the details. The team weekly check-ins and what they do, or teams checking in. Mid-quarter reviews, why do you do them? What's the benefit of them? And then finishing up with the end of quarter retrospective. We're going to try and piece together all these processes and understand why we have them and what happens if we don't do them well, in a summary coming at the end. As Anna said, if you've got questions, please ask them in the Q&A section on Zoom. We'll answer live, but we'll also try to consolidate and answer the questions as we go along. Now, For those of you that have joined other webinars, we'll often talk about the learning process being multiple quarters. And really our focus this quarter is about a singular quarter. Yes, it will take you multiple quarters to get good at OKRs, but for a lot of people, getting through that first quarter or going from quarter to quarter is often a point where things break down. One of the processes is obviously developing the OKRs, and often that's about developing the C-level, the company level objectives that align the team level OKRs. And we talked about that and how to set them a lot, but just to give a quick overview to the other process, the team check-ins, plans and deliverables, mid-quarter review, and end-of-quarter retro. Those are the pieces we're going to discuss. So from the start to the end of the quarter over the month, and how that leads into us being able to develop the objectives and OKRs for the next quarter. Let's start with the setting part. And this is often where people get stuck, or they take too long, or don't think about the processes around setting the OKRs. Well, one good way of thinking about OKRs are often coming from the strategy down to company objectives, but this is very much about leadership. So the leadership has this top-down influence on the organization in the way they set the strategy, and then how do they translate that to company level objectives? It moves then to the teams and the team manager, setting team OKRs, and then thinking about the projects, initiatives, or the plans that we work on, and experiments, iterations. What do we do to drive the OKRs forward? This comes down to the individuals often. Often a plan, a task is down to an individual. Team OKRs, projects and initiatives about the team. And the company level, the leadership is influencing the direction. So we have this bi-directional dependencies in OKRs. And what it really means is everybody has a role in making OKRs work. The leadership needs to do their roles well as the teams and individuals down below. This is a chart we often share, and it's getting people to think about how they start developing. And it really comes from this vision, mission, strategy, or direction is one of the areas that company objectives come from. The other one can be company KPIs that are off track. Not that the company KPIs are the OKRs or objectives, but if we need to improve or grow a KPI or the KPIs behind track, it could be one of our priorities to focus on how we're going to improve it. Team OKRs align up with that. Again, team OKRs could come from KPIs that are off track, but they're not the same as KRs. It often gets confused. Just reiterating the same things won't help. Now, we've covered this in a lot of detail in other webinars, and we're more than happy to share links to other webinars that have covered the writing of OKRs, KPIs versus OKRs, etc. The point here is, though, we need to make sure we're driving in the quarter the team objectives forward that are aligned to the company objectives, and we're doing this through the initiatives, plans, projects, and tasks. So there's already a lot of pieces in here: company objectives, team OKRs, initiatives, plans, projects, KPIs, vision, mission, strategy, or strategy to objectives. And we need to make sure we put all these pieces in the right area. So we need to understand, why are we developing the company level objectives, off-track KPIs, company and team level, strategic implementation for next quarter. How are we going to achieve our strategy? What do we need to improve, or what skills do we need to develop to execute our strategy? Team learnings that could be considered for improvements. We're going to talk later about retrospectives, what we do at the end of the quarter, but often taking what has been learned up to the company level, and maybe some of those areas, those learnings, those lessons, the insights will help us develop next quarter's OKRs. Now, a lot of times people ask, well, how do you go about it? Well, one of the things that OKRs do is set you about focusing, and there's different ways to choose which are our company level objectives, and it could be use impact, confidence, ease, ICE, or risk, impact, confidence, or the many other tools to basically rank the ideas we have, and basically take all the ideas we have and pick the top 1, 2, or 3. So basically, you can use different methods, and those same methods could also be used by the teams to prioritize objectives. It might be that you don't have to do it every quarter, but sometimes you want to get fresh ideas up there, or you want to make sure we agree the top ranking ideas to focus on. So there's different ways of doing that. The team level OKRs, what we can do that align with company objectives. Do we have KPIs underperforming? So the setting of the company level objective should set the direction for the teams to think about what they can do to achieve that. Key results. We've often talked about key results. They are outcomes, they're measurable outcomes, they're measurable business outcomes. It's probably the one area which people struggle with to write good outcomes and skip. It's the one area that if you don't do it well, you will see issues in the adoption of OKRs. You've also got to limit the numbers, and that doesn't matter whether it's at the company level or the team level. The point is focus. You need to think about what you can really achieve within the quarter. And for the company and team levels, that often depends how big are the OKRs. Writing one very involved OKR for a team might be all they could achieve. Maybe 2 or 3 smaller OKRs might be possible. You just need to think it through. Now, I'm not going to cover more on the OKR writing. Again, as I said, we've got other webinars that we've covered in a lot more detail on that subject. What we're going to go into now is talk a little bit about the teams or the group of teams check-ins. What do we need to do weekly, bi-weekly? And what we're really talking about here is this team check-ins part. So we've developed our OKRs, and we need to check in with our OKRs. And what are we looking to do in that check-in? Well, number 1, is the OKR on track with progress? We have a quarter. A quarter has 13 weeks, and our OKR progresses over those 13 weeks. And are we on track? We also need to think about how did it change since the last check-in? And that really, from the perspective of what plans did we complete, i.e. plans or projects drive the OKR forward. They drive the key results, the outcomes forward. And what did we learn from that? And then from there, we really need to think about, okay, what's next? How are we going to keep driving the OKRs forward? What new items do we need to do? What do we need to redo because it didn't work, or refocus past actions? These items shouldn't take long. If you really think about what you need to do, it's 5 to 10 minutes max per team. But what it is important that we think about it in this process. And just to give an example here, we have an OKR here, and each week from the start of developing it, time will progress. Week 1, we made some progress, and week 2, oh, we're now green, we're on track. Week 3, we're still on track. And then we get to week 10, but in this case, we're showing it as amber, and it might be we use a red, amber, green scale, meaning we say if we're on track or top third, 66 to 100%, we're green, in the middle, amber, and below that, red, so we can track progress of achievement. Week 10, 76% of the quarter has gone, but maybe our OKRs in this case has made 50% progress. We would be amber, we'd be in that middle third of progress. So it's just about making sure that we can understand when we look at an OKR, are we on track? Are we making the progress we expect in the time through the quarter? What also is important, we talked about, executing on plans. So we set our OKRs, we plan what we need to do, whether it's a bigger project that we're executing on and launching and developing parts of that as we go. That is driving the OKRs forward, and we should see week on week progress. So week one, we saw some progress. We moved the OKR forward in week one. Great. What are we going to do next week? So we need as a team to decide what's important to do, and probably from what we did, what we need to do. It's basically all about thinking, what do we do? Did it work? What's next? Keep going. So week two comes along. We did some plans. We completed what we said we were going to do. But maybe there's a little bit of lag. Maybe what we did, we know is going to take a little bit longer time to come through. That's fine also. Still, we would go off on plan for next week. Now, we get to the third week and we've executed week three's plans. Week two's plans actually worked. We saw some good progress there. We saw a nice jump. Basically, what it's showing us is what we're working on driving the outcomes forward. A plan or a project is a series of plans. We did ABC. Did ABC drive the outcomes that we're measuring as success forward, which drives the objective forward, and how did it change from last week? So relating and understanding what we're doing versus planning for next week or planning for the next weeks. Now, that's weekly. Now, if I was doing a single team, that would work fine. What happens if I want to do multiple teams? So in some cases, you might want to do a group of teams. You're running a department, or because of the necessity to closely align between a group of teams, you need to do it as a combined meeting. Now, if everybody went through each team went through 10 minutes, it might be okay with 3 teams and 30 minutes, but if there's 5, 6, 7, 8 teams, it starts to get a bit long. So we might think about doing it in a slightly different style. We might say, well, okay, we'll do 2 weeks plans projects completed and 2 weeks plans projects in place for the future. And then the next week, so we're still going to do the meeting weekly, but we're going to look at the OKR progress for the last 2 weeks. And then we're going to set the plans projects progress for the next 2 weeks going forwards. And then we're going to look at progress of the OKRs in the 2 weeks, in the week afterwards. So we're going to stagger the meeting. We're going to try and just take the OKR progress and what worked, and then did we complete the plans and what we plan for the future, separating the execution side from the results side. So it can be done in different ways. And I think the point is there are different ways, and even within different teams and groups of teams, you might want to do your check-ins slightly differently. However, you really don't want to be any longer than sort of a 2-week gap between any of these phases. Reviewing the OKR progress and waiting 2 weeks, or looking at execution side every 2 weeks is fine. We kind of will learn and we will execute, and we will never get too far off track. What happens if we did it every 4 weeks? We would have 3 learning cycles. If we were behind after the first month, we probably, if we're too far behind, couldn't recover quick enough. We couldn't action things. And often the thing that's missed with people is we need to do something to drive the OKRs forward. And that's really what this check-in is ensuring we're thinking about. Now, the OKR check-in is what makes OKRs work at the team level. The plan, do, check, act, or the various versions of that are true. If we're doing it weekly, we've probably got 1 to 6 or 1 to 7 cycles to learn and execute on. If we're doing it bi-weekly, maybe we've got 7. Either's fine. It can work well. What's important, though, is we have that weekly or bi-weekly review and make sure we do it. The whole team needs to be contributing to the ideas. The point of OKRs is you might have people that aren't going to work on the OKRs, but they might receive the benefits of improvements of the OKRs, and they might have great input. So getting the team contributing to the ideas is really, really important. And it's done in that check-in. It's added to the regular meetings. OKR check-ins, as we said, make OKRs work. It should be fun. You know, the idea is with OKRs written well is I know what the outcomes I need to drive in my team are. And it's not telling me what to do. It's telling me what success looks like. And we work on different ideas to drive it forward. And that engages people. You know, the check-in should involve single or several teams, ensuring ongoing alignment. Now, if you're using multiple teams, alignment isn't just drawing lines. It's about getting people to think together and understand what other teams are working on and the challenges they have. OKRs only take 5 to 10 minutes, as I said, per team. And it should really be part of the regular meetings. It should be an add-in to whatever meetings you have once a week to make sure it's done. I'm going to move on to the mid-quarter reviews. And what we mean by that is somewhere around the middle of the quarter, we're going to review how we're doing. Now, OKRs are not necessarily fixed. You know, we might want to change a team OKRs, or we might want to change a KR, or we need to have learned something by the middle. And the point of the mid-quarter review, which is done typically mid-quarter, there are companies that do it monthly. I think for a lot of companies, that's a lot of extra effort, and the mid generally is a good cadence for it. Doing it more frequently if you can, not a problem. But the purpose is, one, we share the insights with everybody, and if all the teams are sharing how the OKRs are going, what's working, what's not working, where they have problems with their OKRs or with the OKR process, means others understand what's going on in the organization. That sharing of learnings on OKRs and OKRs process, usually if one team struggles with measurements or different areas of the OKR process, everybody's got the same questions. Sharing those lessons learned, how we overcame them, or asking others how they overcame it, helps us learn quicker. It also improves accountability. So in a team or at the company level, if you're presenting the company objectives, having that accountability that you've got to explain what you've done and how's it worked means you're accountable, means the team's accountable, means the leadership's accountable. Setting better goals, sharing the OKR process, we learn faster. And then next quarters, we'll be setting better goals and improving the OKR process, often to make it quicker, faster, better for us. It shouldn't be overly complicated. At the company level, it's all about leaders giving an overview of the company level objectives, maybe some comments on the teams and how they're doing, but is there OKR process learnings? Were the company level objectives good? One of the hard things at the company level is setting the right magnitude of company level objectives. They need to be narrow enough to allow the teams to set and write good OKRs. If they're too broad, they won't. If it's too narrow, some teams will feel there's nothing they can do with it, or it's very focused on a single team. We've written an objective for a single team. Doesn't generally work great. Finding that level is often difficult, and being honest with people and saying, well, we're trying this, and getting the feedback from the teams is important. Is it driving real change? So are we seeing improvements in the organization at a higher level, whether it's the KPIs or other directional indicators, that's showing what we're working on is driving us forward from a high level? From a team level, well, the teams presenting their learnings on the OKR give the progress. We get the insights, what's worked, what hasn't. And then the OKR process learnings, that it could be, you know, measurements is often a complicated one. It sounds easy, but should we average it? What happens? Does it work? Are we measuring the right things? Maybe our project planning methods need to change because we need to launch and check and measure. You know, plan, do, check, act is a way we need to think about it if we're going to drive OKRs forward. So we might need to change things in team processes to make the OKRs move forward in the right way. So company-wide review, it's all about transparency, alignment across the company and the teams. We learn from company and team levels about the goal-setting process and tracking, issues, roadblocks. If a team can't work on something or is stuck with something, maybe you or your team could help the other teams. That's really what good alignment is all about, is getting the company working as a whole together. It should also be thought about that the OKR process learnings are trying to speed up the OKR process. I think for a lot of people, the OKRs become too cumbersome, too complicated in a lot of cases. And that doesn't help everybody write good OKRs. I'm going to come on to now, I'm actually just going to end the poll first of all and just share the results with everybody, just where we are on who's attending. Amazingly mixed results there, or varied different levels of people in. Now the retrospective is the last part. It's the end of quarter retrospective, and it's generally happening that 2 weeks-ish from the end of the quarter. Now, what's the point of it? Well, it's very similar to the company-wide review. So in the mid-quarter, we're doing that review. In the end of quarter, we're kind of doing the same thing. Now, for a retrospective, we've got some very specific things we want to cover. Now, what has worked? What didn't over the quarter? What would we do differently? There's always things you think, or when you sit there and look at it, you can establish, even with the OKRs, what would you've done differently? Whether it's on the execution side, whether it's on the measurement side, whatever it is. What did we learn? One of the points of OKRs, that OKRs should be agile, and learning should be a huge part of the OKRs. And then what open questions do we have? And usually combined with learnings, we learn something, often we ask ourselves more questions. What are those questions? Now, the one difference here is what we're going to do with this is really think about the retro before the end of the quarter, and we're going to collaborate as a team and document it. And this is just an example from a mirror board. But again, it could be a Word document, it could be a PowerPoint document, it could be a mirror board, it could be any tool you like, but asking these questions and getting the team to collaborate and work on agreeing what they learned, what could they do better, etc. So this is just a tool for getting people to collaborate and think through and consolidate their thoughts at a team level, first of all. Not sharing it with everybody else at the start. Then we come to sharing it with others for questions. So other people might have questions resulting to the items we've got in here. And that's great. Other teams asking, how did you do? Or why did you do? Or why didn't it work? Is a great way to learn more. So the meeting for the end of quarter retro is really a highlight from the team or the company level on the items here, and the questions, covering the questions that are open or more complicated. This means the meeting is not super long. It means we can walk through a number of teams relatively quickly. And I have seen big companies do it with recording videos, but it's obviously nicer if you can do it live and walk through it and get everybody together. But you need to make sure it's short enough that people pay attention. And often the other important thing is it takes you time to really look back and analyze what you did, what worked, what didn't work, how do you move forward. Now, it's really important to make sure you do spend that time and thought and discussion, collaboration before the meeting to make it beneficial. What are you trying to do with the end of quarter retro? Well, the point is, if we did the end of quarter retrospective well, it's actually going to help us tremendously with developing the C-level objectives and team-level OKRs. One of the big areas and one of the big failings most companies have is they get to the end of the quarter and the thought of developing the company-level objectives and team OKRs horrifies them. It's difficult. It took them a long time the first time, and the second time they're already burnt out, worn out from it. Doing a retro will often allow you to come up with the ideas in a great way. So the retro should really guide us to what's the next focused areas. You know, it might be from the leadership, the strategy to execution. Should we focus on the same things we focused on last quarter? So we might have a high-level company objective that we say, well, either we didn't achieve it or we did achieve it. We drove great improvements in that area, but there's a lot more improvement. Same focus, move on, or off-track KPIs, growth KPIs, companies and teams. What are the issues we have there? And again, we will have put those on the retrospective if we have KPIs that are not growing at the rate we need, or they're off-track quality type KPIs. The other one is, can we improve the OKR process to work better? And better often means with less pain. It should be fluid. Everything should fit together. And I think a lot of times skipping this retro, it means we haven't set ourselves up for easy next quarter OKR creation. Discussing the complexities and setting a clear direction for the next quarter comes out of these retros, and it will make things much, much clearer for the team and the company level. I want to summarize. Now, we talked about good OKR cadence, and it is important that you set these cadences, that you have the processes and cadences in place to make OKRs work for you. If we start slipping, so what I mean by that, if we wait till the beginning of the quarter and then we start developing the company level objectives and team level objectives, to do it well, it's going to take time. And then what tends to happen, instead of starting to execute 2 weeks into the quarter, i.e. we started 2 weeks before, 2 weeks afterwards, as the longest time to create OKRs, we're now starting into the second month, and sometimes weeks into the second month before we start executing on the plans. And that has a kind of knock-on effect, that the plans and deliverables, you know, starting late just reduces the time for the plans. And that means if we've written OKRs for a quarter and thinking we had 13 weeks there, or 11 weeks, and now we've got significantly less, 8, 7, 6 weeks to execute on, we're not going to achieve what we thought we were going to do. What it also means is the mid-quarter review gets pushed back, or often it gets skipped as well. The problem is we need enough weeks of execution to make this even worthwhile. You know, if there wasn't enough progress, if there wasn't enough weeks of actions, there's no point doing a mid-quarter review. So it ends up getting either squeezed in time into an end of the second month, or skipped, or rushed and skipped. And that in turn means, well, obviously from a mid-quarter to the end of quarter, we need this time to get towards the end of the quarter retro. And again, it gets squeezed in time, and it gets squeezed into the very last weeks or days of the quarter. And that in turn means the development of the next quarter's OKRs is often rushed. We haven't had time to think it through. We're now starting the quarter and we're quickly trying to develop them without the best thought, maybe. And this is quite common. And this is where a lot of companies will stop. They will get a quarter, 2 quarters in, but because they haven't got the right processes, it becomes rushed, it becomes cumbersome to do OKRs. And I think doing it the right time is important, but there's other complexities in there. What about the quarters? And this is very much from a Northern Hemisphere and a European perspective, in a sense, or Western perspective, that here we are, quarter one. Well, we've got New Year coming in quarter one, and then quarter two comes along, and there can be Easter and other holidays, and you know, maybe May Day and some bits in there. But not quite as much disruption. And quarter three, well, summer vacations in Europe. So it might be that we have partial Teams availability, or we might have shutdowns for weeks or multiple weeks. Anyway, there's less time there. And then we get to the third, quarter four, sorry, that should read there. Winter holidays, the Christmas holidays, the other holidays starting there at the end of shortly. And that backs onto the new year. So actually from the transition to here, we've got to think about that. Well, we might need to think and say, well, we might want to do the retro earlier in December because we need to get that done. And we might want to set our Q1 OKRs in December before we leave for the winter holidays. So when we come back after the New Year holidays, we're ready to start working. There's other things that can affect it. If I talk about Weekdone, this quarter one, for me and the customer success teams is exceptionally busy. Everybody is thinking about goal setting and OKRs in Q1. I know that until mid-February, we'll pretty much be flat out with meetings and customer discussions and assisting and helping and answering questions. At max, I've got 6 weeks for that quarter. So just thinking that through, one, setting our OKRs before we get there, but even thinking in the quarter, how much time do I have? This quarter and summer are a little bit easier. This quarter, we have the holidays at the end, et cetera, et cetera. So just thinking it through. Now, one of the things, it's a little bit interesting that I've seen recently a lot of people talking about, well, maybe 4-month sections are better. And basically, a lot of people do that because it gives them time to spend a whole month developing OKRs. All that really does is we're lessening the amount of learning cycles and the improvement times that we're going to get. You're still going to face the same issues that the end of quarter, the holidays here and New Year and vacations are all going to fit in. I don't think it really helps most companies. Thinking about what you can achieve, adjusting where you set and where you do the retros to work for you is needed. You really need to think that far forward. You need to think about what's really achievable at the company level and at teams level. And different teams can have different things impacting them. As I said, for us in CS, Q1 is the busiest, but it's not going to affect the product team. They're going to still have the same amount of weeks, whether or not. So it just needs some thought. Just to summarize, setting and aligning OKRs is the start. Don't burn out on it. A lot of people, I think, spend too long, make it too complicated, and they do burn out with setting the OKRs, which means they haven't got enough energy and thought left to go off and work on the actions that drive them forward. Learning the processes and improving is critical to the long-term success. So we've talked about it takes multiple quarters. You can do it well from this first quarter, you'll get benefits, but you'll get better and better at it as quarters go on. But that means you have to learn as you go along. Some OKRs elements are flexible, and I read a lot of items around OKRs, and I find it very interesting that sometimes people write, yeah, OKRs are flexible. And often what they consider flexibility in is areas that shouldn't be flexible, and areas that are flexible, they've written in a very rigorous way. And I think you've got to be able to work out that a lot of these cadences are not really that flexible. You've got to stick to them. Writing OKRs. What you write them on, completely flexible. How you write and structure an OKR, a lot less flexible. There are right and wrong ways of doing it. Sharing of OKRs and insights helps cross-team alignment, but it also helps the learning. Alignment is one of the areas that a lot of businesses want, but it isn't just joining lines. It's not just drawing lines between teams and different goals. It's very much about getting everybody to understand the direction we're going and setting what they do in their team, and the teams are all working in a common direction is the first level of alignment. Sharing of OKRs process insights helps improve our OKR processes. It is important that we make the OKR processes our own, make them work for us. Again, comes a little bit back to the flexibility. There is flexibilities in there. Think about what should be adapted to suit the teams, groups of teams, company, but make sure you don't flex on the areas that should be written in a certain way. Doing retrospectives helps us collectively set better OKRs. I think it's the one thing, and certainly we've learned, from doing retrospectives, it makes it so much easier. We started a week ago in Weekdone, or maybe even a little bit more, already thinking through in the different teams about what have we learned, what do we need to think about. And already it's starting to get us to the point where we have some good, strong ideas for Q1 OKRs and what we're going to focus on. And we're doing that without the stressed feeling. And I think just allowing yourself that time, doing good retrospectives, doing good mid-quarter, having your team or groups of teams check-ins working, all these things just make the OKR process enjoyable and a lot less rushed and stressful. And that basically is the summaries. Now, if anybody has any questions later on anything OKR related, you can either email us at hello@Weekdone, or you can go to our LinkedIn Weekdone site and you can ask questions there. If you want to email me, Richard@Weekdone, and my LinkedIn is also below. We are more than happy to answer any questions. Hopefully Anna and Tanel have been answering the questions that everybody set. I'll leave it there. Anna, do we have questions?
Yes, we do have a few, but please post your questions in the Q&A section. If you posted them in chat, we will not address those questions because we cannot see them the same way that we see them in the Q&A. So if you posted something in the chat, please copy paste it to the Q&A section. But we do have some questions already that we can address immediately. I kind of grouped them into topical areas so that we don't go back and forth on a specific topic, and we can just focus on one topic at a time, but it may include several angles to the question. Mm-hmm. So the first one, how involved should leaders be in developing team OKRs? Do OKRs always have to be created with the whole team?
Presuming the leader sits above and the teams are separate, the leader's involvement is setting a good directional objective. The teams should generally be tasked with setting their team objective and key results that are going to align with the leadership's objective. Now, that means they're probably not involved in creating the OKR, but they will certainly need to agree it. The leadership needs to believe the OKRs set by the teams are the right things to meet his bigger picture desire. Some of that is about making sure as a leader you set a good objective and a good context explanation or explain why this is important. The whole team, generally, yes. My backgrounds come from business development and sales teams. So if I was sitting there and I said, well, the people working on the sales OKRs are kind of like the sales management, director of sales, and maybe some admin levels. We won't involve the sales team in setting the OKRs. However, the sales team are probably the ones that could give ideas on the biggest area of improvement for what they need. So trying to make sure we involve everybody and set good OKRs that the whole team believe in is important.
We have some follow-ups on the same question. It's Do OKRs always have to be created with the whole team or a part of it? What percentage of OKRs can be top down, and who should be present at the formulation of an OKR? So it's kind of like all on the same topic. I think it's better if we address it like in one answer.
Yeah. Let's start with the first and last ones there. I mean, is it best the whole team is involved? Yes. Are you going to start with some ideas to get that discussion going? Maybe we're going to do it in documents and comments and do it outside of a meeting, but we're going to formulate what we think are the right things to work on. Might be that we start with objectives and then we work out what are the right objectives for the team, what are the right focus areas of improvements that align with the level above, and or fix the KPI issue. So it's better to have a group developing that. You're going to get the best ideas. No one person will come up with all the best ideas. And then you're going to drill down from there and work out which ones do we need to focus on. What percentage of OKRs can be top down? There isn't really an answer to that. I mean, OKRs aren't top down. Objectives are top down. Direction are top down. Team OKRs are for the team. It's a little bit, it's not a project, an OKR. You've got to think about OKRs aligning up, down the organization. One of the first slides I showed there, the leadership have their roles, the team has their roles, and the individuals have their roles in executing the actions to drive the OKRs. I think, you know, you might set one OKR because your particular team has an issue on a KPI. You could say that's not top down, that's your team problem. Then there may be another OKR for that team that comes from the leadership level. Or, you know, maybe you have to choose which one you work on. You can't work on them all. So there's not sort of a percentage formula to say what's up, down, etc. It needs to work for you, but it needs to be driving in a common direction. I hope that answers it. Anna, I don't know, have you got any other comments on that?
I think the main idea to get out of this topic in general is that both sides, like top down and bottom up, are involved, right? So you want to set a direction so that people know what the company's strategy and vision is and what specifically the leaders are expecting for this quarter. But you want also everyone's input on if it's even achievable or not. So you get the team to validate the strategy, the vision, or the shorter term objective. So through explaining, like leaders, through explaining what they expect to happen in the next quarter, right? We also get feedback from people, from the teams, if it's achievable or not. And usually through this discussion, a lot of new things come out, right? So that you can actually know what is going to happen and what is not. I feel like there is a lot more to discuss on this topic, top down and bottom up. So I will include more links about alignment, best practices, and a step-by-step process how to make it work, because it's a whole other topic, which is also an interesting one, right? We have another topic that consists of several questions. So let's address them one by one because they are pretty big questions too. So the first part of it on this topic, and the topic would be about the time frames for each process that we discussed. So we have 3 months for OKRs, we have weekly for the weekly check-ins, and then we, so we have different time frames. So the whole topic is addressing that. The first question on this topic is, discussing OKR progress weekly seems like too often. What if we need at least 3 weeks to see any impact on the key results? Do we need to have a meeting just to say that nothing has changed at all?
You don't have to have a meeting to say nothing's changed at all, but if you've done something in week whatever that you know is going to take 3 weeks to come through and be seen as improvements on the key results, do you stop doing anything on improvements and wait for that to happen before you think what's next? You shouldn't. The point is, what you should be doing is, we action this. We know it's going to take a little bit of time to roll through and be seen in our key results. Now, one of the things that's important is our key results need to be influenced by actions. So having the right key results that we are seeing changes in is important, but we don't do something and then sit twiddling our thumbs and waiting for 3 weeks. What we should still be doing is saying, well, okay, we think that's going to take a few weeks to come through, but what's next? What else are we going to work on? Even if what we did came through, it's unlikely that that one item we worked on that's going to take 3 weeks to show in our key results is going to make them go from 0 to 100. It's going to be a small part of it. We need to keep planning. And the problem is, if we don't either do it weekly or bi-weekly, we have so few cycles there. What happens if we get to the 3-4 weeks down the road and whatever we did didn't work? And that's very common. A lot of businesses struggle with we got to the end of the 4-week period, the first month, and everything we did made no impact at all. Boom, we're stuck. We're probably never going to recover from that. So making sure you're planning out what we're going to be doing, what what worked, what we're going to be doing. Do you believe what we did is going to work 1-2 weeks out? And making sure the other things planned are also in progress to drive it forward. So it's not set, wait and watch. We will learn from it, but we need to keep trying to move things forward. Our key results are going to be the outcome of a number of plans, projects, tasks, usually. There was the second part you said, Anna.
Yes. There is it's multiple parts on the same topic. So I'm just going to read it one by one. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is a comment combined with a question. OKR is agile, so why are there fixed structures like weekly and 3-monthly deadlines? At least the weekly deadlines should be set dynamically according to need. Fixed series for deadlines are not particularly agile, are they? If it's an agile method, the team should decide when to evaluate and reconsider, or am I misunderstanding? And the final part of this question. Where do the numbers weekly and 3-monthly actually come from? For me, this is pretty out of the air.
Okay, so agile doesn't mean you can do whatever you want whenever you want. All agile processes have fixed cadences to meetings. Some of them even prescribe how long the meeting should be. Agile means learn and move forward, learn and move forward. Agility is not flexibility in some of those areas mentioned there. Agility is about doing something, did or didn't it work? What do we consider next? Doing that quick enough so we can keep moving forward is important. So we have to have a regular cadence to do that. That's where the weekly and bi-weekly comes from. It's all agile processes, and if you read the Agile Manifesto, which is often for software development only, and it's much more structured, it has some very key things in there. It doesn't talk much about the cadences, but implementations are always around making sure the cadence is correct, that you're reconsidering things at a regular interval to make sure you are thinking about it and you are agilely moving. I think the numbers 3 months come from, and they're not out of the air. They're actually very scientifically proved and been proved since the 70s that pretty much 3 months is the horizon for most companies of what they can see happening. If we go back to, December, if we go back to August, I think many people could start to see the problems of inflation and some other areas starting to happen. But if you went back a year, last December, nobody saw what has happened within this year. Nobody has seen that we were going to suddenly have a high inflation and energy prices and oil prices rising. And it's kind of common, and it gets quicker and quicker in the real life. So 3 months is seen as a period where you can plan, goals for, set directions for, and not have to rewrite them. So you set for the quarter, you action weekly, bi-weekly to drive the OKRs forward. And the whole process of OKRs is developed around a science. Those timings are there for a reason. It does make sense. There's a lot written about it. If you read Measure What Matters and some of the other books on OKRs, you start to see where this came from and why the understanding was that. I think there was something done by, I don't remember which consultancy group or whether it was one of the other big universities in the US. And I think it was something like 98% of annual plans fail massively. And one of the big issues has been is people feel comfortable planning out for the year, but equally it doesn't help the business and it doesn't work. So a 3-month horizon and planning out for the 3 months and seeing where we get to and then planning the next 3 months is taking less time. It's more directional. If things change, we can adapt. We don't have to reevaluate, but we keep progressing forward. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I completely agree. Agile doesn't mean random, actually quite the opposite. When you're trying to organize people to do something like in a workflow in a very consistent way, you need some discipline. If there is no discipline, that's not management, right?
Yeah.
And agile is about learning, making sure whatever works for you is implemented and taken forward. Whatever doesn't work stays behind. So it's more about the frequency of the learning cycles. Agility is about how often you do things, very much. So defining how often you do those things is extremely important. And even if you don't do it weekly, I mean, that's fine. Some companies prefer to do it bi-weekly. For us in Weekdone, we do our internal meetings daily, but it's a very fast meeting. It's like, it doesn't even sometimes have to be a meeting, could be like a written form, just so that we know where we all are. Right. And then we do certain types of meetings bi-weekly as well. So whatever works for you. But we've seen for most types of companies, weekly cadence just makes sure that everyone has enough time to think about what's next and has enough time to actually execute on something, to share some learnings from the deliverables that they're working on. Maybe like bi-weekly is actually more relevant to cross-functional check-ins. Sometimes if you want to have between different teams, like an alignment session to see what is everyone working on, definitely weekly may be too often, right? Then bi-weekly would work. Some companies even do those cross-functional check-ins monthly. Depends on the size of the company and, again, how agile you are. So the frequency really defines as well how often you do these alignment sessions with one another. Okay, so let's move on from this topic. If there is anything else that you would like to discuss on this one, please feel free to add more questions. But for now, let's move on to the third question. What if we made a decision to roll out OKRs in the middle of the quarter? Do we need to do a retrospective in a month, or do we consider the first OKR quarter as Q1?
You still need to do a retro. And it's fine to start. A lot of people hold off starting their OKR process and say, well, we'll wait till the start of the quarter. I think wherever you start, the first quarters are very much about learning. So starting mid-quarter is absolutely fine. But you should still do the retrospective in 3-4 weeks' time. I think it is important to go back and say what worked, what didn't work, and understand what the teams and team leaders think and what the leadership thinks of how it worked, and make sure everybody's on the same understanding and the same learning. I think don't worry about it too much. Get started. Get the retro done. You won't do a mid-quarter review because it's already the middle of the quarter. But what you're going to try and do to move from that first OKRs to the next quarter's OKRs, the retro will really help you. It will make it much, much easier to set the OKRs. It will make it much less stressful. So doing it in a good format, a written format, and getting everybody to think it through will just make it easier for everybody. I really can't stress how much you see people stress on the quarter changeover, and it doesn't have to be that way. It should be much, much easier.
I think here the question, or the part of it that maybe wasn't written, is, do we need, like, if we start in the middle of the quarter, do we need to write OKRs for 90 days from now until whenever 90 days runs out?
Yeah, no. I mean, you write them for if I start in the middle of the quarter and we want to do it on a certain cadence of it doesn't have to be January, February, March. You know, you could shift when you do your OKRs, but you know, that's something you have to decide and decide on internally. What is Q1 and what is Q2, etc. But if you start in the middle, write them for 6 weeks. Get the first cycle done, work through it, learn, share the learnings, set for the next quarter. Get into that cadence of quarterly setting and learning. It doesn't matter if you only have 6 weeks. And sometimes I think it helps people because they write less, they keep it simple, they start to learn the OKR processes, and then they set better OKRs the next quarter.
What we often see as well, that like the first time writing OKRs takes so many discussions and so many back and forth internally that people tend to set very big very big OKRs, very ambitious, and a lot of them, and considering it for the 90 days, although it appears that those OKRs can actually last for the entire year if they even keep their relevance, right, after 90 days. The point here is, it is better for your first ever OKR quarter to keep things simple. If you feel like you can't come up with OKRs for the short term until the end of the quarter, by all means, write a larger one, but still do the retrospective. So if you want to write an OKR already for the next quarter and start working on it now, that's okay too. Just don't get stuck there. But still, when the quarter changes over, do the retro on how you feel this is working out for you, if any changes in the process are necessary. Right. So let's move on to the next one. How much time should I spend at least and at most for definition of an OKR? And can an OKR be included again after one cycle? So can we keep an OKR for the next cycle?
Okay, so how much time should you spend? Well, probably you shouldn't take longer than 2 weeks to develop an OKR, especially, you know, there is this 2 weeks plus or minus from the end of a quarter into the start of a quarter. If it takes too long, we start to eat in. And what happens is, as I mentioned, we put the stresses on the mid-quarter or the end of quarter or the retro, and then everything gets rushed. So we need to develop OKRs in a reasonably quick time frame, which means we need to set the objective at the company level and the team OKRs. You should have them ready 2 weeks into the start of the quarter at latest. Teams that are excellent at it will probably be ready a week into the quarter. So they'll give themselves more time to execute on things, which means they can actually achieve bigger OKRs in the quarter. What it will all depend on is how good you get at writing the OKRs, and that starts taking longer. But as you get quarter after quarter, it gets shorter. You can usually condense it. Doing good mid-quarter and retros helps you set the OKRs. It helps leadership and teams set good OKRs. So the cadences I mentioned in here, that 2 weeks into the quarter is usually the maximum you should spend. If you're taking longer, you really need to rethink, and you need to understand, why does it take us longer to develop OKRs? What are the problems in our setting processes? What you would like, if you could set them in one day, fantastic. However, it's unlikely you can probably discuss and think through and work out the best ideas to develop them that quickly. There is a period of time you need to take. It needs to be discussed. It depends how big they are, but you need to make sure you keep them on track.
I did share earlier in the chat the best practices for quarterly planning process. So in our learning center, you can actually see a lot of step-by-step examples, tutorials, and materials that will help you, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Also, keep in mind that to access those links, you need to be logged into Weekdone account. If you don't have one, you can create a free one because Weekdone is free for 1 to 3 users, right? So you can access our materials even if you have a free account. That's no problem, but you need to be logged in. Okay, so the remaining questions that we have are actually less about processes and more about OKRs in general. So let's try to go through them quickly. So the first one, should objectives be measurable or not?
No. The point of an objective is setting the area you're trying to improve. As simple as that.
Yeah. We actually have a lot of these, like starting with OKRs materials in the Learning Center as well. So you can see some very good examples there. So objective is a problem to be solved, right? It's qualitative. It's not a number to be achieved. The next question, should daily recurring activities be mapped in OKRs?
Generally, no, because daily reoccurring activities are usually related to business as usual, not related to improvements per se. And what are you, I would ask what is meant by maps, but your point of your OKRs is about improvements. You know, they're there to improve you and your team and the business and everything else. It's not there for the purpose of controlling everything across the whole company. You've got your business as usual, you've got the processes you're working with. You know, I have a lot of reoccurring tasks, but they're all to do with the business as usual. The OKR stuff is very much looking forward and improvement related. So it's usually not reoccurring.
Yep. The next question, is it necessary that all departments of a company work with OKRs, or is it also okay if OKRs is only used specifically in some areas?
Generally, OKRs should be used across the whole business. However, you might find that some teams may or may not in some quarters have OKRs. It can be that some teams can't influence the areas that we're focused on. It could be that they still then write their own team OKRs, but they're related to their own improvements that they would like to make in their team, but they're not aligned up to the company level objectives. But there is potentially some teams or groups of people that maybe don't have a great deal of influence in OKRs and improvements. Do they need it? Possibly not. It would really depend on the specifics of who we are talking about. And a lot of times when that question is asked, there's some teams that think they don't need it, but they do. So it really depends on the specifics.
I feel like very often this question also comes when there is some more need for like cross-functional collaboration, and when one team has an OKR and another team is helping them to achieve that OKR, kind of like when marketing has a specific OKR and then the design team is supporting that OKR, or the product team has an OKR and then the development team is helping and supporting that OKR. That's fine too, but that still means that the teams are in the OKR process. They may not have their own separate OKR, but they're still participating because they have initiatives contributing to achieving the OKR that is defined maybe at the other team's level.
I think that brings a good point, that your OKR structure doesn't have to follow your org structure, you know, particularly on product development teams. You know, we might have design and PMs and back office, front office, all these groups, but we might have product OKRs. We might not need to differentiate down to the different groups or teams or sub-teams, but we can keep our OKRs at the right level. And that's something else that often people confuse, that they want to build OKR tree exactly as the hierarchy tree. You don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. We started actually sharing a lot of tips on how to do cross-functional check-ins and how to do cross-functional OKRs if it's needed. And to see those videos, it's short video series, you kind of need to follow us on LinkedIn, because this is where we're sharing that. So you can see on screen right now, there is a link to Weekdone's LinkedIn, and there you can see those videos, and maybe those tips would be helpful to you as well. And the final question, and I kind of like it that this is the final question: how can leaders push the team to set up ambitious OKRs? And we did have quite a few questions on this topic about moonshots. How do we get teams to write moonshots?
So, one, don't tie it to pay. Is usually the biggest problem is people read some horrible materials out there and they start tying their OKRs down to individuals, and they don't keep them at the team level, and then they start tying them to pay performance, which means you'll never get those set. Otherwise, you'll actually find that most teams will naturally set OKRs that are stretch. Often they will set particularly key results that are ambitious. I've seen that most teams will overshoot with what they can achieve and how much improvement they can make in a quarter. If they aren't, you've just got to work with them to try and get people to think differently. The point of setting a moonshot versus a roof shot is more about getting people to think big. So it might be that we have to think about what we're going to do to make this happen. But what we're going to do is going to be dramatically different if we're trying to shoot for the moon or we're just trying to get to the roof. And that's the point of it. It's trying to change the way people think, how big they think for what they're going to do to move it. I think it's a whole topic on its own, this moon and roof shots, and setting ambitious goals versus stretches versus, does it motivate people? Does it not? There's a lot of different studies out there on it. And I have to say, my personal feeling is most teams will naturally set stretched OKRs. They will stretch themselves. They will not reach 100%. They will if you say it's related to your pay. Everybody would do that. If I had the chance to set my performance pay side and set the targets to a low enough value, I know I'm going to achieve them. Of course I would do that. Otherwise, I think people will naturally stretch what they're going to do.
Yeah. It's again, yes, exactly. That's a topic of its own. So you can find a lot more on this topic in our learning center. One thing that I wanted to add regarding ambition, I think we used to say, like in our own team that the OKRs, they need to scare you in the right way, but in the right way, not to scare you so that you cannot move and don't know what to do with it, but rather you have a lot of ideas. You have too many ideas on how to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And so that scares you in the right way. But consistently going for something that is not achievable, I don't think that is going to happen if you're following the OKR process properly. If you put in place the process for writing OKRs, the process for checking in on them, the process of reviewing it at the end of the quarter, right, you will learn a great deal from how to set OKRs, what works for your team, what doesn't, so that you become better and better at it each quarter. So at some point, it will take you less time. It will take you, you will come up with a lot more ideas eventually, and better ideas too, right? So it's all about what kind of processes you put into developing your OKRs, and that is what makes them motivating, not the done product, like not the written OKR itself makes it motivating. It's all in the process, how you write them. And that has its own stages, and you're welcome to check them in our learning center. So that was the last question. Thank you so much, Richard. That was a great conversation. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks everybody else at Weekdone for answering the questions in the background. And thank you everybody for attending. And I hope you found it useful. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.